Hey everybody, it's Mr. White here with some notes for you about market competition. So go ahead and get out a piece of paper or someplace you can record some notes and follow along as we talk about the secret sauce that makes free markets work. Now, I know that when some people think of competition or they hear the word competition, that sounds inherently negative, right? It sounds bad, like people are fighting with each other. But when it comes to market competition, it's actually one of the greatest things out there. Market competition is the reason why the law of supply and the law of demand actually makes sense. And when we talk about supply and demand, you'll know a little bit more about what I'm referring to. But in general, a competitive market is a market in which there are so many buyers and sellers that none of them can actually dictate the market price. And so they have to work hard for your business. As a result, market competition gives us lots of really cool benefits. Like, for example, market competition gives us more products. The reason why we have so many different kinds of mobile phones is because there are mobile phone companies competing for your business. We also get lower prices and higher quality products. And of course, I'm sure you've noticed that they're always coming out with new innovations to keep us wanting the products that they produce. And at the end of the day, they even do it with a smile on their face. They give us great customer service because, once again, all of these different firms are competing with each other, and they know that if they're not nice to you, you can get a product that's very similar to what they produce from somebody else. Now, of course, when it comes to competition, not all products are created equal. There are some types of products and services for which the competition is extremely fierce. On the other hand, there are some types of products and services for which there's virtually no competition. So in some ways, I almost think of this like the difficulty settings on a video game. On one end, you've got the really difficult setting, like the world-class setting. And then on the other end, you've got the really easy setting, like the amateur setting. So if you're in a less competitive market, like a Monopoly or an Oligopoly, you can think of that as like the easy setting on the video game. And if you're in a more competitive market, like perfect competition, you're in the more difficult setting. And you can hear my two babies contributing. Parker, can you say hi?
Hi.
See, that's my son Parker, and he wants to help with the lecture today. So you're going to have to hear Parker talk about market competition with me. Okay, so here's a really quick breakdown of the four different types of market competition and sort of what makes them unique. You can see that for perfect competition, which is the most competitive market, the goods offered for sale are identical. And so for that reason, nobody has a control over the price. Think like the produce section of your local grocery store. When it comes to monopolistic competition, it's also a very competitive market, but the products have a little bit more variety. In other words, they're not totally identical. So that means that the sellers have some control over the price. Think like all the different kinds of fast food you can purchase. When it comes to an oligopoly, the variety of goods once again is slight, so in a lot of ways it looks just like monopolistic competition. But the difference is that there are fewer firms, and so the firms have more control over the price, especially the four main firms or the five main firms that control the market. Think like wireless phone service. And then the last type of market, the type of market where there's no competition, is a monopoly. In a monopoly, there's no difference in products because there's only one company actually selling the products. And so that company has complete control over those products. Think like the NFL. The most competitive kind of market is what's known as perfect competition, or sometimes it's called pure competition. In a perfectly competitive market, no one participant is large enough to have the market power to set the price for the product. And it's mostly because this product is homogeneous. In other words, all the products are identical. Now, in order for a good to be in perfect competition, for one, like I said, all the goods offered for sale are identical. And there are so many buyers and sellers that the price is actually set just by supply and demand in the market. A great example is bananas. I was at the grocery store this weekend and I went to go buy some bananas. And when I was looking at the bananas on the shelf, there was just one price. It was 99 cents a pound. But there were different brands of bananas. If you look really closely, you'd see that some of the bananas had stickers that said Dole, which is one banana brand, and some had stickers that said Del Monte. Del Monte is a completely different brand of bananas. Yet they're sitting on the same shelf together for the exact same price. And that's a good indication that bananas exist in perfect competition. It's not that hard to start producing bananas. If you really want to produce bananas, you just need the right climate, you need some seeds, you need a little bit of land, and you can start growing bananas. The barriers to entry are very small. And for that reason, there's a lot of banana growers in the world. And Since there are so many of them, they don't get to decide the price of bananas. You know, if banana grower A decides to charge $2 a pound, but everybody else is charging 99 cents a pound, why would anybody buy bananas from grower A? You know, everybody's just going to go pay the market price, which is 99 cents. So there are lots of different products like this. And if you're a seller in this market, it can be particularly difficult to survive because you face the most competition from the most other sellers. Now, the reason why is because anything that's in perfect competition is what we call a commodity in economics. A commodity is just a basic good with almost no differentiation from one product to the next. The other thing about a commodity is there are many, many people selling the exact same product. So, you know, one thing that you might not have thought of when we talked about, you know, perfect competition or commodities is stocks. You know, stocks exist in perfect competition because one share of stock for a company like Facebook is identical to every other share of stock for Facebook. So you can't decide how much to sell the stock for. It's the market that decides how much Facebook stock will sell for. Gold is the same way, crude oil, and like I said, just about anything that's in the produce section or the meat section of your local grocery store. All of those things are virtually identical, and there's a lot of different people producing the exact same thing. So these folks are what we call price takers, not price makers. They have to just take whatever price the market gives them. So if we're thinking about perfect competition, here are the main characteristics. For one thing, the products are identical. Another thing, there's a lot of buyers and sellers, and the market sets the price, and everybody knows that market price. Like, for example, the price of apples. You can't decide the price for apples. It's a market price for apples, and you have to just sell for whatever everybody else is selling for. And when it comes to the barriers to entry, there's virtually no barriers to entry. You can see we've got our little market competition man down there, and the barrier that he has to jump over to get into perfect competition is almost non-existent. Very easy to get into this market. That explains why there's so many sellers in this market. Okay, now the next kind of market competition is called monopolistic competition. Now, some people get confused and think I'm talking about a monopoly, which means just one firm, but this is not a monopoly. The reason why it's called monopolistic competition is because we have many firms selling similar but not identical products. And the one thing that gives these firms a little bit of control over their price is the fact that they all have their own unique brand name. So, for example, when it comes to watches, you know, a watch is a watch, right? It tells time. But watches sell for vastly different prices based on the brand. Same thing is true for jeans. You know, jeans are jeans. They're denim. They have 5 pockets. They cover your butt. They're usually blue. But if you go to Walmart and buy some jeans, you might pay $20. Whereas you could go to Balmain in Paris, which is one of the most expensive clothing companies in the world, and pay over $1,500 for a pair of jeans. So the reason why these companies can charge these different prices, as I said, is because they all have their own brand name. And so in a way, it kind of makes them like a little monopoly. In other words, anybody can make a watch, but only one company is allowed to call their watch a Rolex. And for that reason, they can charge a different price than other companies that make similar products. So when it comes to monopolistic competition, we're talking about things like athletic clothes or jeans or watches, and there are a couple main determining factors about whether a company would be monopolistic competition. Now, for monopolistic competition, there are still many buyers and sellers, but they have a slight control over the price due to the brand name. And so there's still a low barrier to entry, but not as low as perfect competition. You can see our little market competition man has to jump a little higher to get into this market. And this is all because of brand differentiation. So this is the main difference between products in monopolistic competition and perfect competition. In perfect competition, there's not really brand differentiation. I mean, a banana is a banana. But when it comes to like athletic apparel, Nike can claim to be different from Adidas or Puma or New Balance, and so Nike can actually charge a different price than Adidas or Puma or New Balance for a similar product like running shoes. All right, next up we've got the oligopoly market structure. And this is almost exactly the same as monopolistic competition with one major difference. Just like monopolistic competition, we've got similar products and slight control over the price because of brand differentiation. But in this particular market, we only have a small number of dominant firms, usually between 3 to 5, that basically get to dictate the market price because they have so much market share. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, just think about when you bought your cell phone. I know some of you might say, oh, Mr. White, there's more than just four cell phone carriers. I mean, I see Sprint, T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, but what about Cricket? What about Boost? Well, here's the thing, guys. Cricket and Boost are actually divisions of Sprint and AT&T. So you might think that you're getting something different, but you're actually just getting a product from one of these big four mobile phone companies. The reason why there's only four major mobile phone companies in this country is because it's so expensive to deploy a mobile network. I mean, you have to have towers, you have to have lots of infrastructure, engineers, you got to pay the FCC for wavelength, and it's just not an easy thing to do. And so if you wanted to try to start your own mobile phone company, good luck. You're probably not going to be able to survive in this kind of market competition because there's already four major mobile phone companies out there. And what usually happens if you try to compete with them, they'll lower their prices and put you out of business, or they'll just buy you and you'll become a part of their company. And so it's not just in mobile phones. The same thing is true in airlines. It's true for oil companies. Heck, it's even true for most of the stuff you buy on the beverage aisle at the grocery store. You may not realize this, but about 70 or 80% of all the drinks on the beverage aisle at the grocery store are made by either Coca-Cola or Pepsi. If you don't believe me, next time you're at the grocery store, just take a look at the label and see which company produces these different products. Now, one thing that a lot of oligopolies have been accused of is something called collusion. It's where a small group of businesses work together to fix prices or set output. Now, officially, this is illegal in the U.S., but it is a little bit suspicious that generally in oligopoly competition, if one company raises their price, pretty soon all the other companies are going to raise their prices. This is because they're not really competing very much based on price. They're mostly just competing based on other factors like your belief about which company has a better product, So for example, Shell doesn't really care much about how much they charge for their gas because they know that people don't really choose Shell based on quality. I mean, because gas is gas. Mostly they're choosing Shell for other reasons, like maybe they like the clean restrooms, or maybe they just like the fact that they have a Shell reward credit card and that's why they buy from Shell. Now, a cartel is what we call a formal organization that fixes prices and controls supply. That would be like OPEC or something like that. So a cartel could have a pretty big impact on market competition. Okay, so when it comes to an oligopoly, now you can see our market competition guy has a little bit more of a challenge to get into this market. If he wants to get into starting his own airline, there's going to be a lot of barriers to entry. So when we're talking about oligopoly, the main characteristics, like I said, in almost every way, it's just like monopolistic competition, but we have a lot fewer firms participating in this market, generally less than 10. Once again, the products are identical or just slightly different, and it's mostly just the brand that differentiates the product. But the small number of firms, especially the major firms in this market, have a disproportionate amount of market power. And so they get to basically decide how much the product costs and how available the product is. And due to their extreme market power, there's also pretty significant barriers to entry. Like I said, if you try to get into oligopoly competition, most likely what's going to happen is they're going to just crush you with, predatory pricing, or they're going to just buy you out and your company will just be absorbed into one of those big companies. Now, the last kind of market competition is what we call monopoly. I'm sure everybody's heard of Monopoly before, especially if you played that board game as a kid, the really annoying one that nobody ever actually finishes. A monopoly is just when one company controls the entire market for a good or a service and basically gets to decide how much that product costs and how available it is. Some great examples would be like the NFL, because if you like pro football, guess what? There's exactly one pro football league in the United States, and you could really argue one pro football league worldwide. I get that there's like NFL Canada or whatever, but I mean, honestly, who actually watches that? Maybe a few Canadians, and that's about it. So if you really like top-level pro football, you've got exactly one choice. Same thing is true in the city of Houston. If you want to ride a bus, there's literally only one company that does public transportation in the city of Houston, and that's Metro. This is actually by design. Nowadays, for a monopoly to exist, they usually need government approval. And so, for example, with Metro, the city of Houston has decided that it's better to just have one bus service. I guess they think it's more efficient that way. And so there's no competition allowed for Metro, and that's why Metro is the only bus that you're ever going to see in the city of Houston. Now, you'll see Microsoft up there, and I know you're thinking, well, but there's Apple and a lot of others, but but if you grew up in the 90s like me, you would know that back in the 90s, it was pretty much just Microsoft. And actually, they got in trouble in 2003 with the federal government over antitrust violations. Antitrust laws are the laws that prevent monopolies, and so Microsoft was actually accused of being a monopoly, and as a result, they had to restructure their business back in 2003 to come back into compliance with federal laws. So a monopoly is the easiest kind of competition to survive in because there is no competition. So here's our market competition man again, and as you can see now, he's completely stumped. There's no way to get into this kind of competition. When it comes to a monopoly, there's only one seller. There's no substitutes. It's literally take that product or leave it. And as a result, the one seller has total market power. They are the price maker, and as a result, if you want the product, you have to pay whatever that one firm is charging. So as you can see, there's a complete barrier to entry for other firms, and so that prevents any competition in this particular market. Okay, guys, and that's about it for market competition. So here's a quick recap of what we just talked about. Remember, there's 4 kinds of market competition, from most competitive to least competitive. The most competitive kind of market is called perfect competition because all the products are identical. So the many firms and the many buyers in this market have to just take whatever price the market gives them as a result of supply and demand. So commodities like tomatoes and gold and stocks, that's what we would find in a perfectly competitive market. Monopolistic competition is a kind of competition where the sellers have a little bit of control over the price, even though there's still many buyers and many sellers. And the reason why they have a little bit of control over the price is because of their name brand. Remember, monopolistic competition means that they're like little monopolies that basically have the right to produce their own unique version of a pretty standard product like jeans or fast food or toothbrushes. Oligopoly is a lot like monopolistic competition with one slight difference, which is that there's only a small number of firms that offer the product. So think like mobile phone service, airlines, oil, there are many buyers but not very many sellers, and so as a result it's a lot less competitive, and these companies don't generally care very much about things like customer service. And last up, we've got the monopoly, which of course means there's only one seller, so it's got a unique product, nobody else can produce it, so there's complete barriers to entry, and for that reason that one company gets to dictate the quality and the price and the availability of that product. So think like Metro buses here in Houston, or the NFL, or Comcast if you like cable service. Comcast is the only cable provider in the city of Houston. I know that there's AT&T Uverse and all that, but it's not quite the same. Anyways, but for now, guys, that's what you need to know about market competition. So if you have any questions, please see me in class. Of course, if you like my YouTube channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time, guys.